Hard refresh.
Surefire way for me to get an email that I'm waiting for is for us to start the podcast. So that's what we're going to do. So let's just start the podcast. Welcome everybody. We now have a name, Hard Refresh. You would see that down below or in the email you got that came here. So this is our quarantine editions. The first several episodes, you enjoyed us in our natural habitat, which is in front of a bookcase. But at home, we're in front of guitars.
Yeah, that's right. We are.
Guitars there.
And drums.
And drums. And drums. Welcome, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, Caitlin will yell at me if I don't do this.
Yes.
Hit subscribe. Hit that little bell icon so you get notified. And leave your comments, suggestions, or questions down below, and we shall answer them. So what are we drinking tonight, Nick?
Today I've got Dogfish Head. This is the Sea Quench Ale. It's a sour.
Oh, sours, dude. No.
Sours?
Okay, this is the anti.
Oh, yeah, that is the anti.
So, although I apologize, this is the draft stout. This is in the bottle. You're supposed to drink it in the bottle. The cans you can put into the Guinness glass and you get that nice head on it. But it was a rough day, so.
Good. So this beer is interesting because it has black limes in it.
What's a black lime?
Interesting.
So I think a black lime is I assume it's literally just an old lime or like a lime.
Like a century lime?
I have no idea what a black lime is.
All right.
So rotten lime.
So we have the access to. So you know what? Black lime sounds like a DC character, right?
DC?
Like well, you got Black Adam, and you got and you got Shazam.
Black Lightning, Black Thunder.
Black Lightning, right? So, it's a dried lime. It's a lime that has lost its water content, usually after having spent the majority of its time in quarantine. No, just drying in the sun. Oh, it's a dried lime. It's like a raisin to a plum.
Yeah.
So there you go. I guess increases its flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are we talking about today, Nick? What are we talking about?
So today we are continuing our conversation from last time. We are talking about Aria attributes. So these are attributes that you can add to your applications, in this case, our HTML, just to make them a bit more accessible. So they're going to communicate extra things to screen readers, different assistive technologies, and they're just going to add more semantic language.
All right.
Very small.
So we were talking about Aria Label last time.
Yeah.
So the two ones we're going to talk about tonight is Aria Labelledby and Aria Describedby, and those are essentially like additions and extensions of that label attribute.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they work at the same level, but they add to the semantic meaning of that label. All right.
So Aria Label was an attribute that you add to an element so that when a user gets to it with, let's say, their screen reader or something, it would read that label, but it's not visible, right? It's not something you can see. It's just something that's kind of hidden in the code, and it's communicating to the screen reader, right?
Right.
For Aria Labelledby and Aria Describedby, we're going to point instead to other elements. And we're going to say this one element is actually labeled by that guy. So normally you would point to something else that's visible. Or you could say this element is described by that element. So let's say you could point to a title, or you can point to some other text that's already on the screen.
There's another attribute though that's just standard HTML that does that for the regular labels, like label 4, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
I always thought Aria labeled by always reminds me of like labels and their relationships, like inputs and labels.
Right.
And Aria described by always reminds me of figures. So with a figure, you have a figure caption, right? And
Right.
it's just more robust description to an
Okay.
image that already has an alt.
All right.
All right.
So
Kick it off.
let's dig in. So let's dig into Aria labeled by. Dun dun dun.
Yeah.
You can put in some kind of cool sound effect there.
Explosions and
Yeah, right.
okay. And then we have Aria labeled by. So let me show you an example of some code where Aria labeled by would be perfect. Some good candidates for Aria labeled by. So if you remember last time, we used Aria label a couple of times and talked about a couple of ways Aria label's great. So
I will say, Nick, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We're going to have the most accessible fake blog.
We do.
Okay, proceed.
Okay. So last time we had a read more link and we added Aria label to that.
Right.
And what that did is it allowed us, let's say you get to it with a screen reader, it would read instead this name, read more about Star Wars, instead of reading read more.
So we would sometimes do hidden text in there, right? So we would do the hidden text after the read more before the end closing of the A tag.
Yeah.
Say about Star Wars, and it would be in a span.
Right.
Is this kind of takes the place of that?
Yeah. So this is another way of doing that. So each element has what they call an accessible name, right? And the accessible name is what the browser or the OS uses to communicate to your screen reader to say, hey, this is the name of the element you're on. And so an image alt, a label, an Aria label, or an Aria labeled by are all ways of overriding the existing accessible name. So one overrides the other, and you wouldn't want to use multiple. You'd only use one of these.
Either one. I mean, is there a reason why you would do it? I mean, we did it, years and years ago because we just didn't know about Aria attributes back then. So to me, it seems like, is there any reason why you wouldn't use the Aria attributes?
I guess only to support older browsers, I would say.
And when you say older browsers, you talking about IE 8 and below, or?
Yeah, I mean,
10 or?
I'm not sure when the Aria spec came out, but I'm thinking it's like maybe early 2000, maybe 14 or something like that.
Okay.
I'm seeing the first one was 2014. So
Okay.
if you're supporting anything from before 2014, right off the bat, they may not support. They may not.
Which we would think would be insane because it's 6 years ago, but you don't know where the state of users' hardware is at any given time. So,
exactly.
Yeah. You can check. You check W3 schools, but that gives kind of a skewed. It's not the real universe.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I guess the best option is to really test with the different screen readers and test with your different browsers and
see what happens.
Yeah, and look at your analytics and see what your user base is like, and and see what happens.
That's actually a good point, because you do talk about. We always talk about with client stuff about, like, let's see your analytics, because you can go and look at analytics for the general public or the industry, but those aren't necessarily valid, and it is really specific to the client's specific user base. That makes sense. Like, we're not, we're really not doing any work for Internet Explorer anymore, except where the client's customer base has a outsized percentage of people using that browser, and in that case we have to.
Okay. So I mean, as a new developer, you might be kind of overwhelmed. Am I labeling everything? what do I label, what do I not label, and out of the box, most things have labels, and the real things that you should think about what's the accessible name of are really interactive elements, so like buttons, links, inputs, right? Things like that.
Form elements, right?
Right. Things that people are going to interact with. And then also regions. Regions are another really good thing to label. So if you have a nav region or a main region, footer, things like that.
Labeling more so than the semantic HTML5 tag.
No, in addition. So
Okay.
So here's a great example. I've got this blog, right? And I'm going to actually, you know what? I'm going to change the share so that I am sharing my full screen. And then let's see, hold on.
So this was all right. So this was good that we had you clean up your desktop, Nick.
Yes. Okay, so I'm on this blog.
Voiceover on Zoom.us. System dialog. ID 81193606694. Move to
I was
bottom.
surprised by that.
You are currently on a button. Safari. Hard refresh template. Window. Hard refresh template. Web content has keyboard focus. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control Option Shift down arrow.
Okay, so now I'm a user using a screen reader. I get to this site, and one of the things I'm going to do is navigate the site instead of just going through every single element. I'm going to open up that router. So the router we talked about last time has a list of all the different common elements.
Subscribe. Link. You are currently on a link.
To it by
Headings menu.
hitting Control Option U. So here's all my headings.
Form controls menu.
And I'm using VoiceOver, by the way, on the Mac.
No items in red. Landmarks menu.
And here are my landmarks.
Got it. Okay.
So this would be okay if I had one main, maybe one aside, right, which is complementary, maybe one navigation. But
That's
here
cool.
I have a bunch of navigations, right?
Yep.
So it's hard to tell what navigation is for what. So here's a good candidate for now naming or labeling that region.
So what I'll just so let me just jump in. So for anybody who's listening to this on the podcast piece, what we're looking at here is the router screen, but we have 4 navigation regions on the page. Now, of course, the user doesn't see the code. They don't know it's been coded that way, but there's a reason to have multiple navigational elements. You'll have main nav, you'll have sidebar nav.
Items in landmarks menu.
So what I suspect, Nick, what you're going to do is by using this Aria Labelledby, you're going to be able to label those individual navigation regions so that they make more semantic sense to the router, to the screen reader.
Exactly, yep.
No items in landmarks menu. Link. Subscribe. VoiceOver off.
Okay, so scrolling down, here's one of my navigations. I got social media links. I've got another.
So this is footer navigation. We've got social media nav in the footer, and there's a favorites link too as well, a favorite links in the footer. So this is our social media column.
Right.
Got it.
And so I could, to this nav, use Aria label, right? And I could add an Aria label to this navigation and say social media navigation. But instead, I'm going to actually point to an element that we already have on the page. I'm going to point to this heading.
That just made total sense.
It does, right?
No, that's great. So all right. So instead of doing nav with an attribute Aria label equals footer social navigation, we already have an H5 there that describes it visually.
Right.
So what we're going to do is say, hey, this nav is Aria labeled by that H5.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. That's cool.
So we're going to do Aria labeled by, and you're going to notice one thing, especially if you're in the US, labeled by has a funny spelling.
Yeah.
It's got 2 L's here in the middle.
Okay.
And that's on purpose. This I think the spec might have been created in a region where they don't actually spell it like that. Well, this is how we would spell it with 1 L, but they use 2 L's.
Probably the Brits.
Yeah, so some Brit wrote this. And the value is going to be the ID that describes the element.
Okay, so you have to add an ID to that H5 then.
Exactly.
Which makes sense because ID is the way you name things for the DOM. So we just call that ID social title for that H5. Aria-labeled by equals social title.
And
So
that's it.
now I'm very curious to see how that's going to show up in the router. Is it going to say navigation dash social title? Or the that whatever the value, because it's going to give you the value of that H5, right? Not the ID.
Yeah, so and that's a good point. So we'll check it out. I'm also going to label the one below it.
Oh, you're doing this for the favorites.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Let's call it
Let's call favorites because favorites.
Yeah. Okay. And
That's actually very important, by the way, that you sounded out that ID, because if you spell the ID of a particular element wrong the first time and you don't realize it after you've developed your 1,800 lines of code, right? Then you're like, shoot, I spelled favorites wrong, and now it's a pain in the neck to change it.
Now I'm gonna do.
Okay, so now we got a
I'm gonna hard refresh.
hard refresh. Hey-o!
Take a shot. Do you understand how many times I tell people to hard refresh?
we were watching that IT crowd video Mervin sent around.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you turn it off and turn it back on again?
Did you hard refresh?
Did you hard refresh? It's a cache issue. It's always a caching issue.
All right, hold on.
All right, so we're good.
VoiceOver on Safari. Hard refresh template window. Toolbar has keyboard focus. You are currently on a toolbar. To interact with the items on this toolbar, press Control, Option, Shift, hard refresh template, web content. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, landmarks menu.
And there it is.
Oh,
So it added it as a label.
why is it uppercase? Is that because is it uppercase in the code?
No items in landmarks menu. Hard refresh template. VoiceOver off.
Let's see. It is not.
It is not. That's interesting.
Text uppercase. So it's taking the CSS style.
Oh, it's taking the CSS style. Look at that.
That blows my mind.
Can you actually? You know what? Let's just
try.
test this. Get rid of text uppercase, and let's see what happens. That's
VoiceOver on
interesting.
Safari. Hard refresh consecutor. Landmarks menu.
Yeah.
You are currently in the VoiceOver menu. This is a list of VoiceOver menu options.
Look
To
at that.
navigate up and down the list, use the arrow keys. To choose a menu item, press Return. To close the menu,
Oh.
press Escape.
Again, that doesn't really matter to a user who's blind because they're not seeing that anyway. It's just going to read it as social media, not all cap social media. It's not going to yell it, right?
Yeah.
So I like how that does that though. So it says social media navigation and our favorite sites navigation.
Yeah. Exactly.
I like it. Yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Very, very, very semantic. Very understandable.
Yep.
No items in landmarks menu. Closing landmarks menu. VoiceOver off.
Cool. All right. So that's Aria labeled by.
Yeah. So I mean, another great use case is if you have, let's say, a modal. This is another, let's say, a region, and you could have this instead be Aria labeled by, and then here you're pointing to the title that's within the modal. So this modal here has role dialog. So it would come up as a dialog, and you could just basically point to the element within that says, in this example, user preferences.
User preferences.
Right. So you're basically just doing more associations.
So I like that because it says associations don't change how you code.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're just you're coding, you're doing good semantic markup, you're giving IDs to elements that you know are going to be necessary for other elements to reference. And it's just a reference. You're not adding more code than you need to. And then you're almost looking at that ID almost as if it's a variable. So now if you happen to want to change the name of that navigation, you just change the title on the modal.
Yeah.
Now that's updated.
Right.
For the screen reader.
And I kind of like Aria labeled by more than Aria labeled in use cases where you could use either or, because you're pointing to something that, or you're adding code that maybe is useful for visual users too, right? So, normally,
yes,
that title, let's say if that title wasn't there, you'd be in a situation where you say, you know what, maybe everybody should know what this grouping of links is or what this navigation is for, and let's just visually show it on the screen. And
yeah,
right.
I like that. Very cool. Yeah, well, and then also the Aria label gives you the ability to say like, well, I know that for users that are sighted, I'm not necessarily gonna, maybe I don't want this to say social media. Maybe I want it to say something else because I'm being cheeky with the content.
Right.
And it says something else that doesn't really make any sense,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes sense if you're looking at the visual and the theme of the site. That way you can just use Aria Label and then say, just call it social media, because the semantic aspect is more important for the screen reader.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
So as I was saying before, this affects the accessible name. You wouldn't want to use it in conjunction with Aria Label or in conjunction with, let's say, an alt attribute if you were trying to label an image, because these things override each other.
Is there a stack order?
Yeah, there is a stack order actually. Yeah, and they talk about that in the spec, in the Aria spec. But
Does
if you
Aria
want
Label take the highest?
That is a good question. I think the Aria attributes probably have the highest.
Okay.
Have the highest.
So basically, only use one labeling method.
Right.
Because if you start using more, you're going to get unexpected results, or maybe expected if you read the spec.
Right. Okay.
All right.
That was Aria
Awesome.
Labelledby.
Cool.
All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is Aria Describedby, and that you can point to multiple elements. You can have a single element be described by multiple elements, I should say.
So let me pause you for a second, Nick.
Yeah.
Jack, do we need to take a break?
You want to take a break?
No. I mean, do we have to take? Do we have to tell the people at home that we need to take a break?
Let's do it. I can take a break. How's your quarantine been going?
How's my quarantine been going?
Yeah.
So my quarantine's been very busy. So as you know, we and everybody else knows, we work at the same company. So we have been very busy. Thankfully, several of our clients have kind of been doubling down on certain things. Other projects have been getting pushed back, but we've been very busy, so that's been very, very good. But other than that, it's just the shift to working from home actually you end up working more, which do you think would be the other way around? Like it was like, I'm not seeing Nick all day. Is he doing the stuff he needs to do? And meanwhile, it's like, wow, I don't have to commute. I might as well just get started. So
yeah.
So it is interesting. There's a lot of articles around kind of the back and forth of that there's a breakdown between the work-life balance, because it doesn't exist, because I'm in my basement, you're in your living room, right, or your practice room. Wait a minute, do you have those guitars and those drums in your living room?
This is the living room is basically the practice room / living room.
So that's awesome that you were able to get your wife to agree to that, because I was like, you're not putting a guitar in the living room. So kudos to that. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
How about you? How's your quarantine been going?
Good. I would say that the same thing is it's an adjustment. Working more, definitely. My dog is also adjusting. He's very confused why I'm home all the time.
Right.
Making noises all the time, and he thinks it's always playtime or always walk time, but he's
right.
hang of it. Yeah. Thankfully I don't have kids, because I wouldn't know how to deal with them home all the time.
Enjoy the time you have now by yourself, because when kids come, you got no time.
Yeah.
But yeah, my guys are older, so I don't like the home, like they're doing homeschooling, but I'm not homeschooling them. And the stuff that they're learning now is like, Jack's like, my oldest is like, Dad, I need some help on this. I don't know what it is. The teacher didn't kind of show us this. And he's doing all his homework on his phone, by the way.
Oh my God.
Right,
that sounds like a horrible experience.
I'm like, why don't you go sit on your like gaming PC that you have? He goes, no, this is easier. So he's on his iPhone 8 and doing his stuff. And so he shows me what he's working on. It's trig. And I'm like, dude, sorry. Way, no way. I cannot help you with trig. I'll see you later. So, yeah. So I could even help him if I wanted to. But yeah, Caitlin, kids today.
Yeah. I mean, I truly thank Jesus every day of this quarantine that I do not have children that I need to be taken care of while trying to, just get through this in a sane way.
So I will say, Caitlin, if Jesus was responsible for having a baby or not, this would be a much different conversation. We'd be calling you Mary.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think about those parents that have to be working from home right now, and then also, make sure that their kids know how to add and spell, and it's just like,
it's rough.
Wow.
Because you can't spend like all day with that, and the learnings are kind of shortened, but it's everybody's got their own quarantine experience. I think everyone on this call, I think, is very fortunate.
Yes.
For like our experience, and it isn't what other people's are, and but you do what you can, and you help who you can, and just take it one day at a time and figure out how to make it happen. So but all right, I think that's enough of a break, Nick. we kind of brought it down, got a little dramatic there. Sorry. All right, so so we did take a break. For those of you that stepped away because you didn't want to hear us talking about quarantine, and you're back, we're talking Aria labels, Aria label attributes, particularly Aria Labelledby and Aria Describedby, which Nick is going to talk about. If you haven't yet, please click that subscribe button, click that bell to get notifications on when we post new, and leave your comments, questions, and feedback below. All right, Nick, let's talk about Aria Describedby.
Okay, so normally with a label, you'd want to be concise. You'd want to only use a couple of words. If you really want to provide a robust description to another element that's on the page, and I'll give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about, you would use Aria Describedby. So I said before, this kind of reminded me of the figure element, where the figure has an image, right? And the image could have a really short alt attribute, and then it also has a caption, and you could have the caption visible or hidden, and the caption kind of just goes on and on and on, describing the image. But here's another example of where you would use Aria Describedby, and that is on a form. So this is an element that already has a label, right? This input says enter email address, and it's labeled by the email address label right above it.
Right. So by the way, we don't have an email list yet.
We do not have an email
list.
We will.
You can subscribe to our fake blog.
Tell us all about it.
Yeah, right.
But there's another description for this input, and that is this small little text below, and it says, "We'll never share your email with anyone else."
Okay.
Right? So there's no association between these two, and if I'm on a
there's no association in for an accessible.
Yeah, nothing.
Accessibility standpoint. Visually, there's an association because it shows up there from a location standpoint. Visually.
Right. Yeah, visually, exactly. Yeah.
So as a user, so as a typical user, that I can see that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right. So for a user with sight impairment. So
some screen readers actually enter what's called forms mode. And forms mode means that once it detects a form or certain roles, certain regions, it's going to actually only do the inputs. It's actually going to skip every text field. So it'll go like this, And what I'm doing is I'm basically using tab, and that's another way a user may interact with these,
Right.
Just by hitting the tab. And what that means is they potentially will miss that extra line of copy.
Got it. Right.
Right. So let me turn on
VoiceOver on Safari. Hard refresh template window. Email address. Edit text with autofill menu. Enter email has keyboard focus. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form.
So you heard all that text. I'm going to hit tab and then go back, but you'll see that it never actually says we'll never share that email with anybody else. So I'm going to go to password.
Password. Secure edit text with autofill menu.
I'm going to go back.
To open the email address, edit text with autofill menu. Enter email. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form. VoiceOver off.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So here, this is already a label. If we were to use Aria labeled by this, it would override our existing email address label, right?
Got it. Yep.
So here we're going to use Aria Describedby. So let's jump into that form, and I'll show you how it works. And it works the same way. The value is going to be the ID of whatever else we want to label it with. So here's the input.
Yep.
And we're going to do Aria described by one word equals, and it's going to be an ID. So let's call this, add an ID to this text area and say email description.
I thought you were going to spell described by with 2 B's.
You would think so, right? Keep it consistent.
Hey, Nick, did you just do a hard refresh?
I did do a hard read. Take another shot.
Oh, I finished mine. I'm done.
Yeah, you're done.
I'll move on to water.
Move out. Good idea.
I had to stay
VoiceOver on
hydrated.
Safari. Hard
Quarantine.
refresh template window. Email address. Edit text with autofill menu. Enter email has keyboard focus. We will never share your email with anyone else. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type. Password. Email address. Edit text with autofill menu. Enter email. We will never share your email with anyone else. You are currently on VoiceOver off.
So you heard it say that.
Yeah.
Good.
Great. That's cool.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So where your label is concise, the description, you can provide more verbose information. This also reminds me of table headers. So normally if you have a cell, it's also described by your different table headers on a table, which would also add another description.
So good use case for forms. This is kind of, you wouldn't really use it for an image because that's what the alt tag does.
Yeah.
Right.
It could be additional information to an image if you wanted to.
Okay.
Let me show you another example of where this would be.
Yeah.
So I've got my modal here.
Yep.
And I've got this close button, and we've already used Aria label on this close button, right? And the Aria label is close.
Got it. Yep.
Let me inspect that, right? And here's our Aria label close from the last time.
Got it.
And
now this is important.
Yeah.
By the way, with these buttons and doing Aria label close, I know we covered this last time, but it bears repeating that with modern UI, a lot of times you're not using the word close or the word menu. You're using the ubiquitous hamburger icon, or you're using an X. You're using these visual metaphors to represent these UI items. So like an X means close.
Right.
But when that gets read by screen reader, it actually is just going to read X, and that doesn't mean anything. Or even worse, if you're using the fantastic font awesome, that's going to read some kind of weird character because that's what the font awesome, that's how it gets referenced, right? So, so the Aria label allows you to bypass all that. So we're already using that. So in our don't use 2 things per.
Yeah. Well, see, the close button has an additional description, and it's kind of hidden here. But at the bottom of the modal, it says, closing this modal without submitting will save your changes. So a screen reader user
will not save your changes. Yeah.
Yeah. Without submitting will not save your changes. Yeah. So a screen reader user would get to that close button and not know about this kind of extra description for the close button.
Right.
So that would be another use case where you would basically make this close button described by this element here.
So it would read the ARIA label saying it was closed,
Right.
and then would read your description and descriptive information. And typically, what we do, correct me if I'm wrong, with these modals is we actually focus on the close button first, right?
Yeah, sometimes.
When the modal comes up.
Yeah, we could do that.
And
Sometimes
if that's
we
the
also,
case, they're basically alerted of what's going to happen if they click that close button without doing what the form is within the modal. All right, cool.
So yeah. There's two patterns. There's one where you focus on the first element that's interactive, which is sometimes the close button, and then the other pattern is what Bootstrap uses, which they focus on the div with a role of dialogue, and that's what Bootstrap does. But
Got
yeah,
it.
either way works. So let me actually pop open the code here and show you two examples how in this modal we can use Aria Describedby.
I kind of want to see what that I love the 80s theme looks like.
It is totally non-interactive. These don't work. But okay, so if I were to go to the...
So we're now in the modal. You're in the code of the modal.
Right. And I'm going to do Aria Described by...
Oh, this is, okay, you're adding this to the button that generates the modal.
Yes.
Right? Oh, no.
No, that's the close button.
Oh, sorry, that's the close button. Got it.
And I'm going to add here an ID to the paragraph that says closing this modal without submitting. Close notice, let's say.
Yep.
And I'll just add that here.
So it's a describe
And
by.
now, yeah, and now a user getting to this will also hear that description.
Got it.
Another use case is actually this group of radio buttons. So these radio buttons each already have a label, right? This is regular theme. This radio button is dark mode theme.
Right.
This one's I love 80s theme. But they're all also described by, this whole group is described by this heading. And again, in forms mode, you might skip this heading, or hitting tab, you might skip this heading.
Yep.
So there's another pattern here, and that is to, you actually have two options. I think the better option is actually not to do this, but better option is to do like an input group, in which you could have a legend. But here you can do role equals radio group. And for that, we're also going to wrap every single one of these radio buttons in this div with a role of radio group. And then to the radio group, we're going to add Aria Describedby. And set that to this ID.
Right. Which is the H3 right above it, which is please select the user preferences.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm interested to see how that's going to work.
Yeah. Okay. So let's
VoiceOver.
Activate.
VoiceOver on Safari. Hard refresh template window. User preferences. Web dialog has keyboard focus. You are currently on user preferences. Web in user preferences. Web dialog heading level 2. User preferences.
So first we're going to go to the close button.
Close button. Closing this modal without submitting will not save your changes. You are currently on a button inside of the web dialog. To click this button, press Control Option Space. To exit this group, press Control Option Shift up arrow.
Yeah, that was pretty good. And now we're going to go to the radio group.
Heading level 3. Please regular theme selected. Heading level 3. Please select your user preferences. Regular theme selected. Radio button 1 of 3. You are currently on a radio button 1 of 3. Regular theme. Dark mode. Radio. I love the 8. Submit. Closing this modal without submitting will not submit. I love the 8. Dark mode. Regular theme. Regular theme. Select heading level 3. Regular theme selected. VoiceOver off.
So that didn't work.
Well, it didn't work. Let's go back. So why didn't that work? I have code. It's got to always happen. What was it supposed to do?
I don't know. I think let's see what it's supposed to do.
On hard refresh, we don't edit out our mistakes.
Yeah. Okay.
Warts and all.
So
is that role spelled wrong?
Is the role spelled wrong?
Like radio group or
radio group, and Aria Describedby is spelled right. Yeah, and this points to that. So let's actually do labeled by for this. I think that actually might make more sense here.
All right.
So I
Let's do
apologize.
that.
We can
With
edit
two
this and
L's.
put it in the previous one.
Right.
So I think we actually do want to label here,
Okay.
and because we're labeling this group. So
Let's see. That's okay. So what that'll do is get people to go watch the other video.
It will.
Or
VoiceOver on Safari. Hard refresh template window. User preferences. User preferences. Web dialog. User preferences. Web dialog. Times selected. Heading level 3. Please select your user preferences. Please select your user preferences. Radio group. Regular theme. Selected. Radio button. 1 of 3. VoiceOver off.
Okay. So yeah, that was a use case for Aria labeled by.
okay.
Yeah. So that worked there.
All right. So if you're interested about Aria Labelledby,
yeah.
put the link in the description. Awesome.
Okay, so one of the cool things about Aria Aria Described By, is that you could point to multiple elements. So, for example, if you had an error message that also appeared under this email address that said, invalid email address, or something like that, or any other email error message or multiple descriptions, you can actually, within the value of Aria Described By, put multiple elements. You just use spaces to separate them.
Oh, like compound classes.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Okay.
also great for, let's say you had mailing address and then business address. You could say that this is labeled by that label, and then Aria Described By the thing above it, which is mailing or business, and then also described by an error message. So you can have multiple descriptions going on.
Interesting.
Yeah. And you would just try and keep in mind punctuation or spaces, and test it just to make sure that if you have multiple descriptions, it doesn't kind of concatenate them.
Because it's going to read them right after one another. So the order you put them separated by spaces within the attribute value is going to be the order it reads it in.
Right, exactly.
All right. Wow.
And, yeah. So that was pretty much
cool.
that.
There you go. Aria Described By.
There you go.
All right. So that is so that's going to be it for this episode of Hard Refresh. We've talked you through 2. We'll end up breaking some of these up and separating them so you can enjoy just Aria Labelledby or just Aria Described By for your viewing pleasure. I think that's it. Any parting thoughts? Where's the wisdom, Nick? I totally put you on the spot. I didn't mean to do that.
Completely unrelated.
Yeah? What is it?
On Amazon, I am binging the show Bosch.
Okay.
About a detective. Highly, highly recommend. Go watch that. This is not a sponsored advertisement in any way, but
Yet.
watch that.
You're right. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. For Nick Lundy, I'm Chuck Killorin. This is Hard Refresh. Subscribe.
And thanks to our producers, Caitlin and Shaq, for all their help.
Yes, because without them, this wouldn't happen.
All right.
All right.
See you later.